All right, welcome. Today is March 1st, 2015, to the next installment in our Life Odyssey series here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Davis. My name is Susan Steinbach, and I will be your moderator today. And we are graced with the presence of Cap and Helen Thomson, longtime members of the church and strong activists in the community in many, many different ways. I think they are well known to many of you in the audience today. I'd like to just start with a broad brushstrokes overview of this wonderful couple. Helen is currently serving as the chair of the Yolo County Board of Supervisors. She's on it for her second term. No?
No, I retired, and Dawn is the supervisor for the second district. I've been retired for 5 years.
Okay, she's off of it, but she was on it for 2 terms. We need to correct the Davis Wiki then.
Uh-oh.
The Davis Wiki is wrong. Sorry to you, Dawn Saylor. So she served in 2 terms there, and she started her career as president of the Davis Parent Nursery School, DPNS. And we had a little conversation about that, how she wasn't intending for a political career. She was a registered nurse and an active parent of 3 small children with Cap. And something about that position then led her to the Davis School Board, and then on to these other wonderful political outreaches with the State Assembly and the Board of Supervisors. So a registered nurse is how she began her career, and now she is retiring as a public servant. Cap Thompson is a very well recognized mental health professional in the state of California. And he began his training at Berkeley, pre-med, then went on to UC San Francisco and Harvard School of Public Health. So that was his background. He'll tell us about that today. And we'll learn about how they met and how they combined their lives together in a very dedicated professional career in many places on the planet. And we'll learn about how they came to Davis in the 60s and their relationship with this community. So welcome, Cap and Helen. And they would like it structured today so that they will take 2 turns each talking about segments of their life. And Cap is going to start off, then Helen will follow that. And then we'll return to Cap and then to Helen for the second part of the event. And they would like you to hold questions until the last 15 minutes of our presentation. And then we'll have some audience interaction. So let's get started. Welcome, Cap. Let's hear from you.
Well, I thought we might begin by talking about how we, can you hear me all right? The green, you want? I'm sorry. Off we go. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. I thought we might begin by saying how we got here, to how the Thompsons and the McLeods came to this country and how we got started. My namesake, old Captain Peter Thomson, and his brother David came from Ayrshire in Scotland in 1841. They came for, David stayed in Sault Ste. Marie, where he married a Redpath girl, and Peter was much tougher. He came across the country with Kit Carson as an Indian scout. He was one of the first settlers on the Mendocino coast in a place called, what is now called Casper. Then it was Pine Grove, where the Point Cabrillo Lighthouse is now. And he was a tough old fighter and a boozer and just the toughest man on Big River, they called him. When people got too close, he moved on up Big River to the headwaters and homesteaded, where his nephew Robert joined him and had 6 children, and one of them was my grandfather, who was who would cut and peel tan bark for the leather industry in Oakland, which was West Oakland, which was big business at that time. And by golly, he had 6 children too, and the second one was my father. My dad grew up in Ukiah and was a miler. He was a poet. He wrote a stanza for each member of his graduating class, and wanted to be a writer and a poet. But then depression hit, and that it led to his becoming a welfare worker and then a probation officer, and ultimately the chief of adult probation in Alameda County. Now, so I was born in Berkeley. I grew up in Oakland, in Montclair, went to Piedmont High School, and then to our neighborhood college, which was Cal, and had Joel Hildebrand as my chemistry teacher, and Chem 1. I saw Hildebrand Hall the other day when we were in Berkeley. And always reminds me fondly when I see Milt. I enjoyed Berkeley, and then went on to medical school in San Francisco, and then in those days, then I went to internship in Denver General Hospital, where I did a rotating internship. And then we had to join some branch of the service because they had the doctor draft. You're put off until you finished your training, and then off we went. And so I went off with the Public Health Service and was assigned to the Coast Guard, and was sent off to Japan, and then to all the way around the coast of Alaska up to Point Barrow, treating Eskimos and Indians, and had really quite a good experience. After that, I was sent to Italy to work in the American consulates in Palermo, Sicily, and Naples, and had quite a nice cross-cultural adventure there. And then I had to decide what I was going to do with my life. And what a very exciting field then was psychiatry. There were new medicines. There was the idea of crisis intervention, the hope that we could make a difference for people by intervening early and trying to prevent the ultimate progression of their condition. And I then, after finishing that program, was
Your residency.
Well, then I went to residency at the Mass General Hospital in McLean, which part of the Harvard system, and at McLean Hospital, I ran into this wonderful young nurse who was assigned to help me with group psychotherapy. And by golly, we began to look at each other a little differently when the group called us their mother and father. and then I went back to the Mass General for my third year, and halfway through that I was asked, would I like to go to the Peace Corps and help them out? They were short of staff down there, and they would count that as part of my residency, so off I went. And but before I went, I suggested to Helen that she might like to join me. And under certain conditions, she agreed, and off we went, a newly married couple.
Conditions.
And Helen, why don't you tell the story now?
Oh, good, thank you. I'll tell the truth. Being Scots for us is a theme through our presentation, and both Cap and I come from very strong Scottish heritage. I was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I was the eldest of 8 children. So from a very early age, I had a lot of responsibilities and needed to be a helpful person around the house. My mother was Marjorie Macaulay. She was born in Prince Edward Island, and she had family that had come on the first ship to Prince Edward Island from the Highland clearances in Scotland. So she was very proud of that. She had Beaton and MacDonald, and all the Macs were in her lineage. So it was rather a surprise when I introduced her to a Thomson from the lowlands of Scotland. My dad was Herbert MacLeod, and MacLeod is a very strong Scottish name from the Isle of Skye, the Isle of Harris, the islands of Scotland. He was a graduate of high school in Medford, Massachusetts, and at the very height of the Depression, and Dad didn't work for 2 years. He spent almost 3 years, actually, spent 3 years looking for work, and he kept a diary of that time, and it was a very difficult time for him. So on my birth certificate, it says that his work was a tea blender, and he did. He worked for Chase and Sanborn on the wharfs in Boston Harbor, and he blended tea. Luckily for him, he took a test and became a bus driver. And that was a really good job in those days. And about 1942, I think he joined. He was unable to go in the service, and so he became a streetcar, a bus, and trackless trolley. Now, for those of you who don't know what those are, I'll be happy to tell you that it's a great big bus with long poles that hitch up on the electric wires at over the street. And Dad drove one of those things for many, many years. And with 8 children, anytime there was overtime offered, he took it. So he worked really, really hard. My grandfather, he was a collector of Scottish music, which was his main love. And all of his Wallensack tapes, and for those of us old enough to remember the Wallensack tape recorders, Dad's tapes are at the University of Cape Breton in Nova Scotia. So we always had a wandering Scottish fiddler from Cape Breton or from Nova Scotia or Prince Edward Island, and every once in a while from Scotland, who would stay. My sisters and I would have to move out of the bedroom we had, and the fiddler would stay in our bedroom. And Dad would always tape them, and so he had a wonderful collection of Scottish music, and it gave us quite a love of that. My grandfather and grandmother on Dad's side were Gaelic speakers, and they spoke Gaelic, and I had a great-grandmother, who didn't speak English, so they were very ethnocentric about their language and their customs in that part of Cape Breton. And when she would visit Boston, which was only once that I met her, she would have to be interpreted by my grandmother to us as children. And they loved that because we couldn't understand a word they said. And they sat around and drank tea because they didn't drink scotch. And I picked that habit up. So, and that's another story. But Grandma would not do a thing on Sunday. You didn't do anything on Sunday with the Scots Presbyterians of those days. They would go to church, and church was all day, and the services were in Gaelic. So that's the background that I came from when I met Cap. My parents met at Rosecroy Hall, which was a Down East dance, and when you're in Boston, Down East is Cape Breton, Prince Edward Island, and Nova Scotia, just so you get your geography correct. My parents worked very, very hard, and hard work around our house was the norm. They raised 8 children, and all of us went to either a trade school, to college, or to nursing school. The girls were all nurses. They all turned out, my siblings are all good people and hardworking and had good careers, and we are very proud of each other. And we used to say about Dad that he was so frugal that when he opened his wallet, the bagpipes played. My mother was the disciplinarian in the family, and she was Catholic. So they, in marrying at their, in the late 30s, 1939, they married. My dad and mother had to be married in the, what is it called, the rectory of the Catholic Church, because they could not marry in the church. That made my father very angry. And so they decided that the boys would be Presbyterian and the girls would be Catholic, and that was a very strange arrangement. But all of my brothers married Catholic women, and the girls who were Catholic have chosen other paths to follow on that side of the life. I had a work permit from the time I was 15, and I worked weekends and summers and sometimes evenings at the Somerville Hospital. And the liability lawyers are very shocked when I've ever said this to them. I was packing operating room surgical packs when I was 15. Now today, they wouldn't let you near the outside of the operating room, let alone inside. But that was the job I had. And I was very fortunate because I had a lot of wonderful people who encouraged me to go to nursing school and to become a nurse. And they provided me opportunities to have some experiences. And one of those was at the Ring Sanitarium in my hometown of Arlington, which is was at that time an inpatient facility for the mentally ill. And I was the switchboard operator on the weekends, the plugged-in switches. And when people would come, they'd come to visit, and I arranged for them to see their loved ones and so on. And that's how my interest in mental illness was sparked and was encouraged, because the folks there really wanted me to go on in nursing. And those were the choice. That was a choice. You were a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary when I was growing up, and it was my generation. So I went to nursing school at McLean Hospital. And McLean, as Cap said, was part of the Harvard system. So we got to go to Mass General, to Boston Lying In, and to Children's Hospital for our other affiliations. And it was a wonderful education. Taught me a great deal, and especially about people and about groups and group process. At the Boston Lying In, I was still Catholic. I was 19. And a woman came in septic shock from a botched abortion. In Massachusetts at that time, there were no contraceptives legal, and there was no abortion. And I sat with that woman as a 19-year-old for the night shift. And she died and left, I think it was 8 or 10 children. And at that moment, I left the Catholic Church because it had dominated the legislative policy in that state for such a long time. And that was a very sad occurrence, particularly for that woman's family. Anyway, 2 months short of my graduation from McLean, Cap came to McLean as a resident, and he was, look at some of those pictures of him, he was gorgeous. And he drove a Porsche. And I thought, So the first night of his residency, I was the charge nurse on that ward, and I was just 2 months from graduating. And he came in and he said to me, I'm the new resident, and I'd like to have the charts for my patients. And then he looked at my name tag and he said, MacLeod, that's a good Scottish name. Were your parents from Nova Scotia? And I was sunk. But so was he. So after graduation, I taught clinical psychiatric nursing during the day. I went to BU at night, and we dated whenever we could, when there was time. And then Cap was invited to go to the Peace Corps and asked if I'd go with him. So my response to that was under certain circumstances, and knowing my mother, the strict disciplinarian, it was going to be marriage or nothing. So we were married in the chapel, and you'll see a picture of it, at the McLean Hospital on December 30th in 1962 at 5 degrees below zero. So Cap is going to talk about the Peace Corps.
Yeah. The last 6 months of my residency training at the Mass General, I was asked to go down to the Peace Corps if I would like to, because they were short-staffed, and I was just doing the outpatient, finishing up my training. I said I'd be delighted. And I went down, and I was asked to interview all the early returnees from all the people who were sent out overseas and then came back earlier than the 2 years that they were expected to stay. And I then logged how long they'd been in country before they came back. Well, after 1 month, some people would come back just frightened to death and just sure they couldn't ever fit in. But then after 3 or 4 months, there was a peak of people who said, I'm still here. I'm not making any difference. I don't speak the language very well. I surely would be happier with my girlfriend or boyfriend, and I could get my master's degree. I could do something useful, right? And then after a year, there was a little peak of people who said they just could stay there committed themselves to a year, and that was it. And very few after that. And so I wrote a paper and suggested that they bring people back together in country after they'd been there about 3 months to say, we know a lot of you are going to have trouble about this time. And so let's try to support each other in that process. Something called anticipatory guidance. And by golly, I was amazed. I gave this paper at the State Department auditorium, and I spoke to Sergeant Shriver, who was the head of the Peace Corps, and his cabinet, and that became then the policy of the Peace Corps. Here I was, just a resident, coming in and trying to make a difference, and I was amazed that people paid attention to me. So I said, well, this is not a bad start. And so after that, I was then I think then I went to the Harvard School of Public Health and took a program in community mental health, which became it was a brand new effort that offered a lot of promise. We had new medications. We had a possibility of keeping people out of hospital and keeping them functioning in society. And so that all went very nicely. And then we met the chair of the Department of Psychiatry in Edinburgh, Scotland, and he invited us to come to Scotland. So Helen and I said, well, that would be a reverse experience. So the Scots came over here, we'll go over there. So we did, and we had a wonderful year in Scotland, working in a psychiatric hospital, and I ran a day hospital. It made me a consultant, and I could do all these things. And I worked under the National Health Service. So I said, this is going to be a great model for our country, because we surely will have a national health scheme within 10 years, right? This was 1963. And so I was all set to go. And then Herbert Bauer, who I'd met a year earlier, was writing to say that Evelyn Rominger and others had been working to set up a mental health program here in the county, and we think we're just about ready to go, and we maybe the Board of Supervisors will approve it, and we'll have money to do it. And from the state, 75% of the money would come from the state, and nobody knew what a mental health program should be like. So Herbert invited us to come over, and we said, well, Herbert is a wonderfully supportive person. We could certainly work with him. And there were no other psychiatrists in the county, so nobody would know when I made a mistake. It was the ideal opportunity, right? So we came, and by golly, we put that program together. I set it up like the National Health Service in Scotland. I said to see, when people would call me, I'd say, have your doctor refer you. And then then when the doctor would call, I'd say, well, how long have you known this person? What have you tried to do for him? Why are you referring him now? And are you willing to continue to work with him? And it turned out that 50% of the people who we saw, I could send back to their primary care doctors, and with that support. And that way, we never had a waiting list. We screened people who were ready to go to the state hospital and tried to keep them here or send them on a voluntary basis if they had to go to the hospital, and then we'd follow them up afterwards. And so we really had a very effective mental health program. And it was the early days before the accountants came along and before the systematizers came along. And we had the freedom to do what had to be done, and it worked. And so we enjoyed that program. We ran it for 27, I was there for 27 years, and I think we were feeling very proud of what we did there. Following that, I retired from that. I went over to the Sutter Center for Psychiatry as their medical director for 3 or 4 years, and since then I've just been seeing the odd patient. I do a little private practice now. Helen?
Cap is very modest. I wanted to tell you that before we came to Yolo County, Herbert pursued Cap vigorously. We had met him this summer before Harvard School of Public Health because Dr. Blum down in Berkeley at the Berkeley School of Public Health had said to Cap, if you want to see a really good public health program, you go up to Yolo County and meet Dr. Bauer. Well, we did that and came up in the middle of August before going back to Harvard School of Public Health. And Herbert took Cap up to Woodland, and Hannah entertained me for the day. And those of you remember Hannah, she was an unusual woman. And she took me over to the pool at UCD. And we had a swim, and then so on and so forth. And the day went by. And I fainted about 5 o'clock in the evening. They were sure I was pregnant. I was not, but it was the heat. So as we were leaving Davis to go back to Berkeley, I said to Cap, I'm never going back there again. Ever. Oh, well. And then when Cap was in Edinburgh, I taught at the University of Edinburgh psychiatric nursing to the first class of college nursing students because it had been so segregated into midwives, surgical nurses, and medical nurses, and psychiatry. But never did they work in each field. And so I did the clinical nursing in psychiatry for those nurses, and they don't do it now anymore, just midwives and so on. They have a good training program in psychiatry as well, psychiatric nursing. And when we were starting to think about coming back, Cap came home one evening with this idea that the chairman had asked him, would you like to go to Baroda, India for a year? And I had said to him, Cap, at 35, you cease to be a promising young man. So we came back. Grandma and Grandpa were in Berkeley, and they wanted grandchildren, and it was time to settle down. And settle we did. We came to Davis in a covered wagon, or a Porsche convertible. And when we left Boston, my mother, who knew so little about the West, other than maybe John Wayne movies, because she'd never been off the East Coast, said to me, tears in her eyes, you be careful of the Indians west of Worcester. And she meant it. She meant it. So we came to Yolo County's fertile soil and had 3 children in a row, 14 months apart. They were dedicated in this church just after it was finished, and I painted all those green-gray stripes behind the redwood. Morag, whose picture you see there as a little brand new baby, was born at Woodland Memorial Hospital because Davis didn't have one at that point that did OB/GYN. She's a pediatric urgent care nurse at Kaiser in now Elk Grove. She started down there at Florin, but is now one of the seniors at the Elk Grove facility. And she lives in West Sacramento, has a dog named Sadie and 3 cats. She's not married. She didn't want any roommates. She wanted to be on her own because she'd been the big sister for so long. And she loves her nieces and nephews, and they come to visit her, and she loves them, and she loves music. She has a beautiful voice, and maybe some of you have heard her sing, and I'd love to have her singing more. Ian is our oldest and second child, and he is our oldest son and second child. He's a philosophy professor at the University of New Mexico. I thought probably he'd be an attorney because he argued with us from the time he could speak. But philosophy is a good field for that as well, I've come to learn. They have two daughters, Darian and Tamsin, who are 12 and 6, and he plays soccer. Ian plays soccer still every Sunday with a pickup team at the university. He played for the Davis High School soccer team, and he played a lot of soccer. And then Mungo and his wife, Carrie Tribe, are artists in Los Angeles, and they have two sons, Eno and Emmett, who are 7 and 5, and we're very proud of all of our children. And we're proud of Mungo particularly because he is supporting that family as an artist. And that's pretty good. That's pretty good. We see what he does. During the time of those three guys, 14 months apart, I had an enormous amount of help from a wonderful woman named Susan Kopic, who I'm very grateful to, and who our kids just love. I can't separate that. I won't go. See the difference in Cap and me already? I have all these notes, and he has little cards. Yeah, can't do it without with the notes. 2 weeks ago, we went down to UC Berkeley, just as an aside, not as an aside, as a point of pride, to see and be at the dedication of the new building, the Campbell Hall, which is right near the Hildebrand Hall. And it's the astronomy and physics building for Berkeley now. And Mungo has a wonderful mural in that building. So anybody going down, go see that building and see his wonderful mural. And there's a brass plaque on the wall, as it was dedicated as well. And it gives his little bit of his biography, and his name is very big. And he looked at it and he says to us, well, they didn't want me as a student here, but they've got me permanently now. So all of our kids have good senses of humor too. While Cap was busy with the mental health department and putting everything together and keeping it going, I was active in the community, in particular Davis Parent Nursery School, since we had 3 kids all in a row going through there. And there were some years I participated 2 days a week because we had 2 children in the program. But I ran for the school board and served from 74 to 86. And really enjoyed that. It's a great job. It really is. It's gave me the faith and education and the will to make sure that our children were well educated and to know what the difference was, and to develop a backbone to be able to stand up to people when they were wrong. And there were some really tough experiences during that time. But I also learned how important teamwork was. I think I knew that anyway from living in a big family, but I sure learned it on the school board again. And then I ran for the YOLO Board of Supervisors. I was there from 86 to 96, and then for the State Assembly. And I think we were asked to talk about something that made us most proud, and I certainly am proud of the bills that we were able to pass that deal with the mentally ill. Cap has always been a wonderful advisor in that part of my life. And I remember that when we started to think about how we would do Laura's Law, AB 1421, which also Evelyn and Rich had a big part in, we took training. I took training with my staff on how to deal with the Scientologists, because the amazing opposition that they have to anything that is mental health is enormous at the Capitol. They testified every single meeting, and they also will send emails that are very untruthful, all under the name of the Commission on Human Rights, the California Commission on Human Rights. So I learned how to deal with them too. And we did get that bill passed, which provides for outpatient mandatory treatment and participation of those who are seriously mentally ill and don't recognize that they are. And more counties, it's been 15 years now, and more counties are adopting that program, and thanks to Dawn for Yolo County's adoption of that program. The other bill that my father would have loved was the California Tartan Bill. We passed the California Tartan Bill, which is a beautiful tartan. It's done after the Muir tartan, the John Muir tartan. And it came from the Los Angeles, that's it, yeah. The Los Angeles Caledonia Club. And another Unitarian, Craig Reynolds, was my chief of staff. And he said, "You're not doing that bill. People will think you're crazy. That's just frivolous. You can't do that bill." And I said, "Well, I'm going to do that bill. I love the idea of that bill." It passed the Assembly with 80 votes. It passed the Senate with 40. The governor signed it in a nanosecond. And the bagpipes played through the Capitol the day that it passed the Senate. And it was bipartisan, and it was a lot of fun to do. And it's a very beautiful tartan. And I think the state ought to have a tartan. So we had a tartan. And I could feel my dad just saying, "Wasn't that wonderful? That's so wonderful." Oh, and my time was done in the Assembly, which was a wonderful experience, an incredible opportunity. I came back to the Board of Supervisors, and I think I was probably more effective my second 2 terms than the first 2, because I knew so much more. I knew so much more about the state and about where to go for help and who to call and whose buttons to push and how to organize when things weren't going the way you wanted them to go. And so I was really happy with that. Now I serve on the Old County Housing Commission, and we've done a lot of work on getting more public housing and affordable housing and housing for disabled and mentally ill people. I serve on the National Advisory Committee for the Betty Irene Moore School of Nursing, and that's really a lot of fun. That's a new nursing program that's just almost 4 or 5 years old now, just 5 years old actually. And it's at University of California, Davis, which was without a nursing program in a time when there is a dire need for more nurses, and that's going to continue. And I serve on the Sutter Health Regional Board as the chair of Patient Safety and Quality and of the Credentialing Committee for Physicians and on the Executive Committee. So that keeps me really busy and out of trouble, as Cap says. So I'll let him talk about his next thing on the cards.
Oh, I wanted to say what fun and support we've had from the Unitarian branch over these many years. Gail Sosnick used to have potluck dinners. And a number of us went to these potluck dinners and found that we liked to sing folk songs. And I played a banjo, and somebody else played the guitar, and somebody else, Chip Northup, did the guitar. We had Ray Kopic with his harmonica and guitar. We had, I mentioned Mark Fayo on the bass. And next thing you knew, we organized ourselves. Somebody wanted to know what our name was, so we had to find a name. We called ourselves the Pewter Creek Crawdads. And by golly, we're going to have our second CD release party on March 28th out at the Palms here.
Tickets now.
Yeah, right, right. So that has been one source of great pleasure and satisfaction for us. In the earlier days, I was involved on the program committee, the building committee for this lovely structure, and on the ministerial search committee for Jay Atkinson. So we've had. So we were much more active at one time than we have been more recently. But this church has been a source of a lot of wonderful support and friendship for us, and we're very grateful for that.
And I think last we were asked to speak a little bit about what our philosophy or our values are, and I just want to speak about mine. I believe in the purposes of government. And I believe in government. I believe it's necessary and needed, and it needs to be transparent and clean. I believe in the people's right to vote and to be informed with that vote. And it really disappoints me when people don't take advantage of voting. I really feel very sad when that happens. And I believe that community building is the result of teamwork. Nobody does anything alone. The team that I had for staff at the Capitol were just fantastic. Any success we had, and of those 81 bills signed, they were as responsible as I was, and often more so. The same with the staff at the county and at the school district. They're very important, and to be able to work together and appreciate each other, I think, is a wonderful thing. And I believe in having opportunity for our young people to have experiences that are successful so that they pick up and carry on and believe in government. I think it's very, very important. And I think that comes from the fact that we served in Washington, D.C. when John Kennedy was the president. And it has always stuck in my head that his saying of ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And that really stuck with me from a big family and from a very Scottish culture and from a musical love of music and a wonderful husband, wonderful kids and grandkids. It's been a very good life.
Right. Thank you, Susan.
All right. Thank you, Cap and Helen. That's a wonderful overview they've prepared for you. And we have a few larger stroke questions to pose to you right now, and then we'll take the questions from the audience. A lot of people ask, how did you get so big or so expansive? How would you respond to that?
Chocolate.
Chocolate is her response.
Oh, my. I don't know. I don't see ourselves as very big, but it's nice to know that we've had little influence.
I don't see us as big either. I think that you take on a problem if you care about something and you try to solve it. I think that we're dedicated to making this a good community. I remember a quote from someone who talked to me about Chris Blanchard's history, because I took Chris Blanchard's seat on the school board in Davis. And they said when she got off the train, I remember she was from Smith College and she was a social worker. She got off the train in Davis in the early 50s and she looked around and her first words were, boy, there's a lot of work to do here. Well, in 1965, I had never lived in a small town. I had only lived in Boston, Washington, D.C., and Edinburgh, Scotland. When I came to Davis, I couldn't believe how small it was. And once a week, I made Cap give me the car, and he had to carpool, because we only had the one car, and there were no buses. And I would drive to Berkeley just to walk on the sidewalks. So I think you just do what you need to do. You solve the problems you need to, that are there, and you work with other people to do that.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, what do you hope to leave for your children and grandchildren, for others, and the larger world? What do you see as your legacy?
You go ahead. Do you have legacy thoughts?
I'm going to talk about the psychiatry and mental health.
Well, as a psychiatrist, I'm happy to see progress in our field where we learn more about the causes of mental illness. Our treatments become more universal, and we see psychiatry and the rest of medicine coming together in a much more integrated fashion. So that gives me great pleasure, and I'm seeing more and more people who are dually trained now in medicine and psychiatry, and are, I think, especially here in this area, and I see that as the future of our field.
I think that the little bits of mental health legislation I did grew into larger pieces across the country. Our parity bill, for example, to include mental health in insurance coverage and benefits, similar benefits to whatever the coverage was for those who had physical illness, became the standard across the country. And it was the first bill to include children. And a large focus for me has been on children. So those diseases that children have, anorexia, bulimia, autism, and serious emotional disturbance, were all included in that bill. And interestingly, for the last 15 years, I've had to follow those, and there's a case that was settled before the California Supreme Court with my name on it just last year, mandating those benefits be indeed carried out by your insurance companies. So you keep working on the things that you care about. So that's part of the legacy. The other is that we have wonderful grandchildren and we have wonderful children. And I'm so impressed with how much our boys do with their families. That is a change from when Cap and I were young parents. He'd go off to work and work for 12 hours, and I'd go home and do the ironing and the wash and take care of the kids and all that stuff. At the same time as the women's liberation movement was happening. And I remember that Evelyn Rummager once told me, you can do as much from your phone in the kitchen. So I think our legacy and my hope for what happens to our world includes that. I hope our policymakers are able to ensure that every American person has health insurance or health coverage or health care, that it includes for the mentally ill. Hopefully by then there might not be any if we can get any money into research, and that's another big challenge. And then I really hope that the folks who make decisions about land leave the farmland for food, and that we have clean water. Hopefully it was supposed to rain today. And we have clean air. I think those are the important ingredients. When I was a public health nurse in Washington, D.C., when I went with Cap, I learned about poverty. I mean, I thought I was a poor kid growing up. I learned, the office I worked in had mostly black nurses. And in fact, I was the first white nurse in that office. And I didn't quite realize that's what was happening. The wonderful African-American nurses knew so much and taught me so much, but I was exposed to such racism. The toilets and the fountains in Washington, D.C. in 1963 and 4 still said whites only. And I hope we've come a long way from that, but there's still so much to work on.
All right, let's open this up now to the audience for your chance to pose questions and interact with Cap and Helen. So if you would state your question, I'll repeat it on the microphone so it gets picked up clearly, and then they will respond. Yes, Peggy.
I really do think of you as very large people. And I have in mind being Scotch and going into the Peace Corps and looking at a world not just from the little place we live in, but the entirety of it. And I would like to ask you a little bit more of what you think did contribute to that part of you.
All right, the question is about the Peace Corps and being Scotch and seeing the world from a much different perspective than here at home.
Well, I think that's really a very good question, and it's the opportunity I found to live in other cultures makes you appreciate your own. And also develops a tremendous curiosity about how people from other countries and other places manage their lives. And so it just expands so much your horizons and what you can inquire about. And when I see this wonderful German Shepherd, I just naturally wonder if she responds only to German.
I think it's wonderful that our young people today have so much more opportunity than I did to travel and to be overseas in various capacities, whether it's part of the educational program abroad from college or a Peace Corps volunteer or just whatever you're doing. Because I agree with Cap, it does broaden how you think about things. And without that, I think it is hard to not see the world as a full place and different, with the differences in it, and then align those differences in your own mind when you come home. I didn't do as much traveling. A lot of those things he did before me. And so he was in the Aleutian Islands with Eskimos. He was in Japan. He was in Italy. We went actually a few years ago to Sicily to visit and to see the place where he had his clinic and his house where he lived, and they weren't there anymore, so that was kind of hard. But I think it's important to travel and to see and experience what other people are doing and feeling and how they live.
Yes.
I can't remember exactly what year you came to California, but was the were the mental health hospitals already built? Was that part of the mental health system when you came?
The question is what year you came to California and Davis specifically, and were the mental health hospitals in existence at that time?
We came in 1965. We had, not only did we have all of the current mental hospitals, but several that have since been closed. We had hospitals in Auburn. We had one in Auburn called DeWitt, where our Yolo County patients went. That was in a hospital that had been built for casualties from the expected battle in Japan from World War II. And there was a similar one in Modesto, which has been closed. And there was a lovely hospital in Mendocino that I thought I'd love to retire to. It's closed now. It's a Buddhist monastery, and there's the Camarillo State Hospital in Ventura County that's now a community college. And so there are only there's Napa State Hospital, Patton State Hospital, Atascadero State Hospital, and I think that is and then there's a special hospital in Coalinga for the sexually violent predators, so-called. So there are maybe 4 hospitals left, but it's easier to get into Harvard than it is to get into a mental hospital these days.
And that's because all of the people who are there are judicially committed now. They didn't used to be. And so for those who would volunteer for care, there's very few beds. And the private sector hasn't done its job either. A lot of the hospital systems like Sutter and the 4 major ones, Mercy and Kaiser. Kaiser has no beds for psychiatry. They contract. And so there's very few beds, and the ERs pile up with people, and there's nowhere to send them. Except jail. The jails are full of mentally ill people. Go ahead.
Next question? Yes.
I heard you say that you were going to play at the Palms. What was the date?
Oh.
The date that you were playing at the Palms
thank you for
with
that
the
lovely
crawdads.
plant, Doug. Yes, I appreciate that. Yeah, we're having our CD release party on March 28th at 7:30 in the evening. And there are tickets available, if you're so inclined, at the Armadillo right here in town. Mm-hmm. It couldn't have been a nicer question, thank you.
Yes, Evelyn?
Please to tell us where the Palms is nowadays.
Where is the Palms?
Oh, yes. Those of you who remembered the Palms when it was in Davis, South Davis, should know that it is now moved to Winters, in the Winters Opera House. Not just Winters, but in the Opera House, a lovely old place. So where there are room for about 212 people. max. And people got turned away last time. So yes, if you'd like to come, we'd be delighted. And Ray, we've got Ray here, and who can another crawdad. So we'd be delighted to see any of you.
That's Ray Kopic in the audience. Yes, another crawdad. Another question? Yes, Evelyn?
I think part of your story should be the times that you were trying to do this. When they thought the psychiatrists were trained in Russia to brainwash us.
That's right.
And all of that.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Speak to the theory that psychiatrists were trained in Russia at the time.
The John Birch Society accused the mental health movement as being a communist conspiracy. And they had all sorts of literature, and they made it very hard for people to agree, county boards of supervisors to agree to go to let the Red Menace in that way to start a mental health program. Thank you for the support of the Farm Bureau, which we had in Yolo County, which many counties did not. And Farm Bureau tends to be a fairly conservative group, as you know. But in Yolo County, they were all for it.
They were all for it because Evelyn was on the Farm Bureau board, and Evelyn was on the first Governor Brown, his mental health council for the state of California that put the big plans together to have county mental health programs in every county. So when Cap says nobody knew what he could make a mistake because nobody knew what he was supposed to do. That is actually true, because nobody did really know what it would take to make a good mental health program. And I'm going to brag on him because he's humble. They got most of the money that was put out for the Bates program in Yolo County because other counties didn't apply. And they put a program together with YCCC to go after that money and to provide the programs that became a part of the county's program. So the leadership at the mental health department was aggressive, and it didn't say no first. It looked to see what could be done. And I know that very personally because there were lots and lots of nights and weekends when I went to the soccer games and the baseball games and all the activities, and Cap would be working, doing those things that needed to be done. But he had good support. He had wonderful support. The community support out of Davis particularly, but out of the rest of the county as well, was wonderful for putting those programs into place. As it was at the Capitol, other than the Scientologists who've replaced the John Birch Society, as it was at the Capitol, when I was first doing the parity bill, the AB 88, the doormen, the sergeants, the folks who worked the desks, who worked in legislators' offices, would all pat me on the back when I went by. This is the truth. Pat me on the back, say, keep going, this is so needed. And then they'd spend 15 minutes telling me a story about a wife, a mother, a grandmother, whoever. And one of the things that NAMI said the other night when Dawn Saylor organized this beautiful fundraiser, Soup's On, which he's done for many years, and NAMI honored us, one of the things that they say is tell your story. Tell your story. Well, when that bill hit the floor of the assembly members got up and publicly told their stories. It was the first time. So I'm really proud of that. But it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work to get people to feel comfortable enough to tell their stories. It's important.
I have a story.
Yes, Evelyn?
Some of us thought that Herb Bauer followed Cap all over the world because he thought he would be accepted in this county. He looks very normal. And he doesn't have an accent or anything like that would make people think he might be dangerous. But the story that I think is the funniest is that he did play his guitar in Haight-Ashbury. You know, he could have been kind of a hippie and kind of scared people. And we were very careful not to tell anybody that he played his guitar at Haight-Ashbury. And Paul Mapes was a reporter for the paper, and he wrote this wonderful story, but he got his name wrong. He called him Cat Thompson, and we were afraid that was going to label him maybe the wrong way. So we had to be very careful.
Cute story.
That's true.
Yeah, that's right.
Are there any other stories out there waiting to be shared? Questions? Yes. Yes, Bill.
I'd like to go back. I'd like Helen to go back to the just brief comment you made about women's liberation. Insofar as that is still a major social problem, and I think it is, would you say a bit more about maybe what you faced and what men especially should be doing?
A loaded question.
I'll speak loudly. Okay. I came to Davis just as Betty Friedan's book was published. And I was already fairly independent in terms of what I wanted to do or what I thought I could do. But I also had children, and I wanted to do something I felt was useful and significant. I knew that the raising of children was very important, and that was useful and significant. But the reason that I ran for the school board was because that was a job I could do and still have a family as a woman. And that's the primary reason. The other reason was because at the time, the school board had no members who had children in school. And I think that's really important. Now, I don't think it's so that you can get your kids on a volleyball team or a football team or anything else. You're not doing that. But it is important to have children in school so that you know kind of what's going on, because they tell you. And you visit the schools and you pick your kids up or whatever you do. You're on the soccer field, you hear it. And so you're more informed. But the women's liberation movement helped early to get women, to encourage and to get more women elected. But it's not doing that now. Women have shied away from, in the last 10 years, running for office, especially at the state and federal level, because there is so much negative campaigning, so much money to be raised. I'm told that when Lois Wolk retires from her Senate seat, it'll be a $3 million race. I find that obscene. I think that needs to be put into our children in our schools so that they have a future. And so I think women pull away from that. They don't like that. And it is tough. It was tough serving in the legislature. Some of it was arguments over the bills, and some of the bills I carried were very difficult bills to carry, and other people had shied away from them for years, which is why they didn't deal with some of those issues. But sometimes the men ganged up, and it wasn't very pleasant at times. Women didn't know how to use that, however. There was a women's caucus. It drove me crazy. I used to say, well, then don't vote for the budget. Why don't we all just say no to the budget? Hold it up. And they wouldn't go that way as a caucus. So if you have the power and you don't use it, then you don't get where you want to go either. So it's hard. I don't know what's going to happen in some of these races. But I think it's important to have women in the decision-making process, because there's a whole bunch of different ways that we look at things. I think it's good for men to encourage women to run. And had Tom Tomasi, who was the mayor of Davis at the time, not said to me, no woman is going to run and win the Board of Supervisors. No woman's going to do that. There won't be a woman there. I wouldn't have run. I was so ticked that I ran. I was going back to school to be a director of nursing at a big hospital like Ruth Sleeper was at Mass General. That was my goal. Didn't happen. And then once you do this, one thing leads to another, and as I always told the young people working with me, the door opens, walk through. So I walked through and took it as it came. Thank you for the question. That's an important one.
Another question. Don?
You mentioned Prince Edward Island and Cape Breton, and I'd like to hear a little more about your ongoing connection to those places.
Oh, my.
Prince Edward Island and Cape Breton.
Well, my mother and father are buried in Prince Edward Island. My mother was from Prince Edward Island. And when Dad learned after she died that that's where she wanted to be buried, he was really unhappy because he thought he couldn't be buried in the cemetery because it was a Catholic cemetery. So I had to call the priest at the little church there in Campbell's Cove, PEI, and ask what were their policies. He said, oh, that went out a long time ago. And so they were very happy to have them both there. So when Dad died, he was also buried in PEI. My mother left how many acres, 80 acres or so, little farm where her father used to grow, well, it wasn't her father because they were on the other side of the road, but her uncle would grow potatoes. And there were there's beautiful potatoes in PEI. Sorry, Rich, but they're much better than American potatoes. So we have that little farm, my brothers and I, and sisters and I, and they keep the house. There's a little house. It's nothing fancy at all, and they keep that. It's right on the coast, right on the water, and it's just beautiful. So I talked Cap finally into spending a month there last summer. We were there for the month of August, and it was wonderful. Really enjoyed it. He said, people come here and they visit and they have tea and they just talk and talk and talk. Yeah, they have tea and they remember how to visit, and I met cousins I hadn't seen in years, and it was nice. Cape Breton is where the fiddle playing was preserved. When the Presbyterians and the Calvinists burned all the fiddles in Scotland because they were the work of the devil, the people who had been transported unwillingly on the drive, I can't think of the name now, the clearances, ended up in Prince Edward Island and Cape Breton. They brought their fiddles. So the music was kept there and it was continued, and they have wonderful ceilidhs. When we were there, we went to a ceilidh almost every night. So you can find music all over PEI and Cape Breton. Go there, it's beautiful. You want to say anything about it?
That's fine.
And there's lobster.
Oh, yes.
Lots of lobster.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Yes, Ruth?
I want to thank you both of you, for all that you've contributed to society. And I want to ask you a question that I know you can't answer now, but maybe you can steer us in the right direction. Or maybe I'm opening another door for you. As I grow older, I realize there are more and more people doing the same thing. And you folks know, you have information, both physically and politically. How do we address the problem of the aging in our society? And if you can't answer that now, would you give another program at church sometime and answer it?
Yeah. Well, one of the benefits, I guess, of modern medicine is that we don't die so quickly as we used to of infectious disease. So, and we can often treat cancer. So then, what is left, right? We can gradually wither away. We can lose our memory. And so we have lots of older people who need memory care. And some of them, of course, require help because they become too agitated and excited or something else. But we don't really have a remedy for the memory problems. So, or a very good system of care. If you have money, you can find some wonderful places to be looked after. We have 3 nice places in Davis. We have URC and at Covell Gardens, and we have New Carlton Plaza. You live at Carlton Plaza, which is a great program, and with Cindy Unger. Yeah, I know, you kind of makes you jealous of those people. You kind of wish you could get it, and that is a real deficiency. I can see that you don't have it, because think of all the care you could get, right?
Oy vey. I think one of the biggest problems for older people is staying involved and keeping your brain alert and being informed, and depression, dealing with depression, because we lose. You know, doing this program, by the way, made me realize that I'm older than I wanted to be. But here we are. So you lose a lot of your friends, you lose a lot of your family, and I think that's really hard on individuals. And so we don't stay connected as we used to things. And the communities are larger still. And so it's harder to make new friends as you get older. And the social ties aren't as strong as they used to be. So I think we need to look at how to structure a system that deals with those things. I know that Sutter, for example, is really working very hard on how to deliver care differently to older people. And that's good. I think that's very good. In terms of the depression, I think it's really important that older people recognize what the symptoms are of depression and to have them treated, because depression is the easiest illness to treat and has the best successful outcome. So that's what I think, is to stay involved. Be one of those senior citizens who gets up at the city council and tells Lucas what to do and wave your cane. That's really impressive. That'll really make him do what you want. And yeah, I think we need to stay alert, stay as much as we can. Oh, and I love this idea that the church is doing of the pastoral care. In fact, I circled that date today. I'm thinking about that.
As a country, we're still not doing a very good job of providing health care for everyone. Do you have any comments about that?
About providing health care for everyone. Government's not doing a very good job.
Do you want to speak to that?
You could.
Well, you know, I was sure when I was at the Harvard School of Public Health that we were on the cusp. We were just about to have a national health scheme where everybody would be covered. I had colleagues in Canada who said that they just see people, end of the week they send a list in of the people that they saw and they get paid. And so hospitals don't need more than 2 or 3 clerks to gather up the money. They don't have to check everybody for their insurance and so forth. Everybody has insurance. Now here we are not very good at that, and we have Medi-Cal for some people, but many people don't apply for it. They don't get it, and and the Affordable Care Act offers a lot of promise, but you've got to get people to sign up. And if they don't sign up, they pay a big fee, a big fine, a tax, they call it now. And now there's a case before the Supreme Court about whether states that have the federal exchange, and that's 36 different states, instead of local state exchanges, whether they will even have legitimate programs. So we have, why we're so resistant to something that should make such perfectly good sense to everybody, I don't know.
I just get mad when I listen to the arguments from the people who oppose, and it just doesn't make good sense. Every other organized country in the world has a good healthcare system. I worry about the people who are immigrants and who are not yet citizens, particularly because the impact on them is even greater, and it's harder and harder to get care. And yet those are the folks who are working in the fields, they're working in the distribution centers, they're working in areas where it's very hard work, and they get hurt and they get injured and they need help. And so that's a huge one. For the young people, it's a different kind of story. A lot of the young people don't think they're going to need health insurance, and so they don't get it. And what I like about the ACA is as it catches up with them, they'll be fined for not having it, so they'll have to make a decision about whether the payments are worse than the fine, and maybe that will prompt them into signing up. But it's needed. And everything, even when you have it, and all of you probably, I'm looking around, have Medicare and some insurance, it's hard as heck to figure out what your benefits are, what's paid, what isn't, which one do you apply to, A or B or C. You have to have a PhD in insurance, practically, to access those benefits that are offered. And then the insurance companies, I give Dave Jones a lot of credit for taking on Anthem Blue Cross. Because taking on an insurance company is really a hard thing to do. They have an army of people. If they had put the money into the security system that they needed for the insurance program, that they put into the folks who come to the legislature to go against everything you want to do that's right to do, they'd have the money for the security system.
All right, I see that our time is up for today, and I want to thank you very much, Cap and Helen, for sharing your life odyssey with us here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Davis today.
Well, thank you for tolerating us.
Thank you.